This is our review of Unit 8b. Picks up where the Gemara left off last. The Gemara left off last teaching us Hainu Kad, Hainu Chavit. Where is it? Hainu Kad, Hainu Chavit. That the word Kad and the word Chavit can be used to refer to the same object. In other words, again, this is just really, again, we said it's a paradigm. It's teaching us that if there are two legitimate ways of looking at a situation, of thinking about a situation, meaning I say chavit, it could mean kad, or I say chavit, or it could mean barrel, or it could mean jar, then either one is valid. So we said, well, when does that even play out? In a business transaction, in a business situation. In a transaction is a better way of saying in business. In a transaction, if two people have legitimate ways of thinking about the same thing, then it plays out that the person who has the money can claim that they were thinking one way, and the other person can't really dispute that, and the money gets to stay with the person who owns it, has the money. The example we had in the Gemara was if somebody gives the buyer, gives the seller, Reuven gives Shimon $200 and says, "I'd like a chavit, please." And Shimon then comes and says, "Okay, deal," and then gives him a jar, and Reuven says, "No, I wanted a barrel." Shimon can easily say, "Well, when you said chavit, I thought you meant jar, and that was the impression that I was under, and therefore you're getting a jar." And the reason why that's allowed, and Shimon can keep the money, is because both kad and chavit can be used to refer to each other. Therefore, a chavit could have been jar or it could have been barrel. That's the situation where that plays out. Now the Gemara is going to ask, well, what exactly? The Gemara is going to ask, in what situation exactly does this halacha apply? When can you actually say that the seller has the right to claim the other way of thinking? So the Gemara asks, "Heichidami, when is this halacha relevant? Ilema, if you'll say be'atra dekada lo karu chavit, v'chavit lo karu chada, in a place where a kad is not called a chavit and a chavit is not called a kad, meaning it's not a legitimate way of thinking to call one the other. So lo karula, then no one calls it that. So you can't say that this halacha applies. So clearly, we're not talking about a situation where nobody thinks the other way. The example we had in class, if you go into any example, right? If I go into a store, a sporting goods store, and I give someone $20 and I say, "Okay, I'd say, can you bring me out a soccer ball?" And the guy brings out a goldfish and says, "Here, when you said soccer ball, I thought you meant goldfish." It doesn't work that way. Lo karula, no one calls it that. No one calls a soccer ball a goldfish. Therefore, the seller can't claim. The seller cannot claim. "Oh, when you said soccer ball, I thought you meant goldfish." Now, just to also point out that the Gemara here is being specific and saying we have to be talking about a case where most people don't use these things interchangeably, or everybody doesn't use interchangeably. Because if everyone uses these words interchangeably, then it's not a chiddush to say, "Oh, you were thinking that way." So that's an important thing to realize also. So the Gemara is trying to come up with a situation where you would not necessarily have thought that you can use the other way of thinking, yet you can. So what's the first possibility? Well, nobody uses your way of thinking. But if that's true, that wouldn't work. Lo karula. So it sounds like this halacha is not a chiddush at all. The Gemara says, no, lo, tzricha, it is needed. In what situation? Deruba karula kad l'chavit chavit. Most people, rove, call a kad and a chavit. Most people say, no, a kad is a jar and a chavit is a barrel, and you can't claim that you were thinking the other one. However, the ikanami, there are also those that use the two words interchangeably, that think about them both ways. So most people would disagree with the seller's way of thinking, but some people would agree with the seller's way of thinking. So mahu detema, what you might have thought, right? Mahu, you might have said, zil bata ruva, you should follow the rove in this case. And since rove of the people, when they hear the word chavit, only think about it as a barrel, you might say that the seller has no right to claim, "Oh, I was thinking about a jar." So the Gemara says, no, Kamash Molan, it comes to teach us that you don't follow the majority when it comes to monetary matters. You don't go, when it comes to money, follow the majority. Meaning, when it comes to business transactions and money and possessions, you can't just say, "Oh, we go based on what the majority thinks." Majority is not enough, because as we pointed out in class, rove, majority, tells you how you can act, but it's not proof. And in order to get money from somebody, in order to say you owe me money and the court require you to pay, you have to prove 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt that they owe you money. So in this case, this is the chiddush that we're learning here, that kad and chavit can be used interchangeably. Meaning, if two people think about if you have one person who think about a situation in two different ways, even though the majority would not think about it that way, the person who has the money can claim, this is what I was thinking, even though you're not the majority, and the seller, whoever holds the money, gets to keep the money because there's no actual proof, it's only Rove going against them, the majority going against them. So let's read through this one more time. So the Gemara asks, Heichi Dami, in what situation is halacha relevant? This halacha that tells you that you can use kad and chavit interchangeably in business situations, what situation is that talking about? We know it has to be a chiddush, so it can't be a situation where most people or everybody use the two interchangeably. Think about the two terms that can think about the situation in two different ways. Because if that's true, it would be obvious. So we're trying to find a situation where you wouldn't think you'd be allowed to think in both ways. We wouldn't think you're allowed to claim that I was thinking about a jar when you said chavit, yet we still let you keep the money. So when is this relevant? If you'll say ba'ater the kada lo karu chavit b'chavit lo karu kada, in a place where a kad is not called a chavit and a chavit is not called a kad, or a jar is not called a chavit and a chavit and a barrel is not called a kad, how lo karula? No one calls it that. So even if you want to say there would be a chiddush in that case, that wouldn't apply. You can't say that two people can think about the same thing in two different ways if no one thinks about it the other way. So So the Gemara says, lo, it's not a problem. Tzricha, this is necessary. It is relevant. When, in what situation? Deruba karulo lakad kada lachavit chavita, where most people call a jar a kad, and a barrel a chavit, and they don't use the words interchangeably. However, ikanami, there are those to karu lachavit kada lakad chavita that call a barrel a kad and a jar a chavit. So what's the chiddush here? Mahu detema, you might have thought, right, zil bata ruva, you should go follow after the majority. You should follow the majority in this case, and in the majority, since most people don't use them interchangeably, therefore the person holding the money can't claim, oh, this is what I was thinking, because most people don't think that way. Kamal Ashlan comes to teach us, we don't follow, when it comes to money, we don't follow the majority. Because again, you have to prove, Rove, majority is not proof, because most people think that way, doesn't mean that it proves that you were thinking that way. And since there's enough people who think like you, there's a significant minority, that's enough for you to say, no, I was thinking that way, and we can't prove that you're wrong, and therefore the money stays in the hands of the person holding the money, in this case, the seller.